Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel, Cynicalex, and today let's talk about native tier 3s, because after the whole Gore fiasco where he was terrible at his release, then he got buffed, now some people are happy, some people are not happy, I really wanted to answer the question, are native tier 3s still worth it? Or are they a massive trap of resources? Because on the one hand, you do have a very interesting development of characters, these 4 characters here, with Mephisto being the one that I'm missing from this lineup here, where they don't have uniforms. So that becomes a really attractive proposition, a really attractive value question for players. But on the other hand, the players that need to save crystals the most and therefore would want to build characters like this who are strong without the need of a uniform are generally speaking going to be free-to-play or low-spending players. So it really juxtaposes a really weird segment of players, I think, at least at the onset. We have to dig a little deeper, of course, but I think a lot of players look at native tier 3s and they say, this is just an expensive trophy. This character is going to get replaced. This character, like Null, is not the best universal villain. He's not even the best villain. Sentry's not the best for PvP. Maybe once upon a time he was, and that's true, but he has since been replaced. So why not just wait? And this is often a reaction that a lot of players have to content in general, right? Oh, why should I invest all my resources into tier 4 Carnage now? I'll just wait for a better tier 4 villain. Why should I invest my resources into tier 4 Black Widow? I'm literally doing that right now. I'm literally saying I want to see a better speed type, right? And that's a common reaction in Marvel Future Fight that I think a lot of players have, and it's normal. I'm not saying it's not normal. And it's honestly, most of the time, a reasonable way to play the game. As the game progresses, there's going to be more and more power creep because they have to keep you interested. If the characters were always the same power level month over month, year over year, the game would stagnate and get super duper boring. So they have to keep climbing up the stairs little by little by little. That's why if you compare the strongest character last year to the strongest character this year, there's more of a there's a difference, right? There's a gap. And if you compare like 2 years ago the strongest character to the strongest character now, like the strongest tier 3 2 years ago was Ghost Rider, right? I mean, he was good, but he had a glaring weakness. No heals. The best tier 3 they've released recently, compare Miss Marvel to Ghost Rider. She knocks him out of the park. She obliterates him again because of power creep. So you can always wait to see, and you will see something better, right? And even with native tier 3s, if you didn't invest in Null back in January of 2021, if you just waited 5 months, you got a better native tier 3. Mephisto was just better for PvE than Null, PvP aside. So you can just wait and see. And so in a way, native tier 3s are just expensive trophies. That is true. On the other hand, they do have an interesting quirk, and this is before any of them have ever gotten uniforms. I still hold out that we will see native tier 3 uniforms eventually. I'm not saying soon. I'm not saying I want them right now. Some people do, actually, to be honest with you. I do see some people saying I really want a Void uniform for Sentry. I don't blame them, or they really wanted a uniform for Null this time around to bring him back to the meta. Again, I don't blame them. I know it's very expensive. It would be like a 3,000 crystal uniform or something crazy like that, but I don't blame them. But we've seen all the native tier 2s get uniforms, right? Literally. Almost almost every single tier 2 on this top line has gotten a uniform. Every single native tier 2 on the second line has already gotten multiple uniforms. Molecule Man is the only one who has not, and that's because he is just under 2 years old now, right? He's a pretty recent addition to the game. But they'll get uniforms eventually. But in the meantime, the rate at which their value decays is slower than other characters. Let me say that again. Native tier 3s have this interesting property where they lose value much more slowly than other characters. Now, you may not think that they're worth as much from the beginning because you had to fork over 3,000 crystal CCF, cosmic cube fragments, and you had to fork over, 150 million gold, right? Some people has spent 200 million gold for Gore, so they're like, this is crazy. A regular character costs you like 30, maybe 40 million gold. So you're paying 5-6 times the amount of gold. Instead of 800 CCF, it's obviously 3,000. That's like 4 times as much. I'm doing some quick maths on the fly here. So for the cost, you expect him to be 4 times better. That's not how it works. Gore costs 4 times as much as Hulk. He's not going to be 4 times better. There's just no way that would be possible. He would be way too broken, or Hulk would be shit. So what they have to do instead is, I don't know how it works. Honestly, sometimes in Marvel Future Fight, it feels like there are like hidden knobs, right? Hidden multipliers and sort of gauges and levels that the devs play with to keep characters in the meta long after they've expired. Another good example of this phenomenon, which I don't have a name for it yet, and it's kind of a conspiracy theory, is what happens with Sharon Rogers and Luna Snow. Long after they're out of the meta, they somehow continue to have some relevance and some value. I'm not saying they're meta, but they just don't suck as much as fast. They take way longer to suck, like a broken vacuum. So with that being said, it's sort of what I see applying to native tier 3s. Null is not the best villain. He's not even the best universal villain for PvP or PvE, right? Dr. Doom, Thanos. However, he's still serviceable, very serviceable. He can still do content decently, you know, almost 2 years after his release. Most characters 2 years after their release are just bad, just straight up bad. Like, you just don't want to use them anymore, right? Like, why would you go back and use a tier? Like, why would you go back and use Carnage with his old uniform? That's how old. That's almost how old Null is. You sort of see what I'm saying, right? It's just night and day. Mephisto is probably the best example of continued value, right? We're a year and a half into his introduction, and he still has value for ABL and new game modes that are coming out, right? You find me another tier 3. Like, look at, like, Human Torch is good, but Human Torch was released at the same time as Mephisto. As an end game player who built up both of those characters, I'm not using Human Torch anymore. I'm phasing Mephisto out, don't get me wrong, but he's far, you know, he's much further away from being phased out than Human Torch. Human Torch is done. I haven't touched Human Torch in like 6 months. I can use him for story mode fragment farming still because he's fast as hell. He's cheeky as hell for that. But that's all he's got. That's literally all he's got. And I made a really fun video about it, and it's basically all about the Firestorm skill. But besides that, he's been supplanted. He's been replaced. So that's really where I see native tier 3s sort of developing and taking up space in the meta. It's sort of like a slow burn. You're not necessarily going to get as bright of a burn. You're not going to get as OP of a character as you will with like brand new tier 4 Hulk, brand new tier 4 Iron Man, right? Obviously, these characters are going to be stronger. Level 80s, tier 4s are going to be stronger than native tier 3s. But what the tier 3s have, what the native tier 3s have to their advantage is this sort of subconscious, you know, it's hard to measure, but they'll be around. Gore will be around in the meta in 6 months. I can promise you that. Again, he's not going to be the best for the meta, for the PvP meta, but he's going to be in the top 5. There's just no way, right? There's just no way. I mean, people still use Sentry. It's been 2 years. Show me a PvP character that is used 2 years later, right? So it's a really interesting topic. A lot of people still ask, you know, should I build native tier 3s? And like I said at the beginning, it's sort of a weird subsect of players where it's great because you don't have to spend crystals, but then it's brutal because you have to spend massive resources. So I really think that it's something that is more of a project for older players. So if you've only been playing this game for, I would say like a year or less, native tier 3s, thank you, Ledox, but not right now, man. I'd say if you've been playing the game for a year or less, I would say the native tier 3s are probably out of your reach just because it doesn't make sense. But once your roster reaches a certain level and you start to generate a lot more resources, native tier 3s do begin to hold more appeal. Now, that being said, would you go back and build Sentry and Null if you didn't before? Probably not, no. And I'm not saying that you should. I'm just saying wait for the next native tier 3 because they may not be the top of the meta when they first come out, but eventually, not eventually, they'll pay dividends, and they'll you know, pay back their value over a longer period of time if that's something you're looking for. If not, it's just an expensive trophy. Absolutely. There are some people who hate native tier 3s who just avoid them at all costs, and they have very interesting rosters, right? There are people who still haven't built up Thanos, for crying out loud. And it's the same principle. Why should I invest 80 million gold and 8,000 black antimatter into this one character when I can take those resources and I can build 4 or 5 other characters? Again, if you have especially if you have the crystals for it, it absolutely makes sense. But that's when you get to, like, you got to start buying Stark stashes, you got to start buying more crystals monthly and stuff like that to sort of balance things out. So I do find it pretty interesting. I was originally going to make this video saying, like, native tier 3s are a trap and they're really not worth your resources. Stay away at all costs, basically, unless you're like a massive whale endgame player or you just love having expensive trophies. But the more I thought about it, I was like, it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's sort of like that. It's sort of like having an expensive trophy. You certainly don't need any of these 4 characters to do all of the content in Marvel Future Fight. That being said, their value is different than regular characters' value, right? Like, a regular character gets a uniform, like a regular tier 1 character gets a uniform, and they're in the meta for a few months, and then they just slowly disappear. And then in 8 months to a year, they're gone. They're out of the meta, right? There are definitely a few exceptions to this with native tier 1 characters, but by and large, that's what happens, right? Because they just get replaced by other tier 1 characters. But for native tier 3s, they don't really get replaced in the same way. It may also have to do with the fact that most of them are villains. 75% of native tier 3s are villains, and villains get upgraded much more infrequently. The devs are much slower to buff and introduce and upgrade villains than heroes. Most updates revolve around heroes, so that also could have something to do with it. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you think. Are native tier 3s a trap? Are they worth the investment? Is it somewhere in between? And what kind of players should be considering investing in them? New players, returning players, players who just hoard a lot, or endgame veteran kind of things, or whales? Who knows? Or all of the above. Or none of the above. I have no idea. But yeah, hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.